Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. It was another mundane Tuesday when I received a frantic call from Valerie, my wife of 6 years. The sink's broken. Water's everywhere, her voice crackled over the phone. I'm calling a plumber. By the time I returned home, my clothes stained with the day's work, the house seemed oddly quiet. A sleek toolbox sat by the door, a brand I didn't recognize. I shrugged off my jacket, the anxiety to see the damage driving me forward. In the hallway, soft moans broke the silence, chilling my spine. My heart thudded against my chest as I approached the slightly ajar bathroom door. Inside, the sight froze me. Valerie, with her blouse unbuttoned, was far from alone. The plumber, a tall man with a mischievous grin, was more engaged with my wife than any pipes. I stood there, invisible to them, the shock cementing my feet to the floor. My mind replayed Valerie's desperate call, her plea for a plumber, her flushed face now making sense. She had orchestrated this, destroyed our sink on purpose just to bring this man into our home. The shock turned to anger as I watched, unseen. The plumber noticed me first, his eyes widening in panic. Valerie followed his gaze, her face turning pale as she scrambled to cover herself. "Jason, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, reaching out to me. "Don't!" I barked, my voice harsh, echoing off the tiles. The plumber grabbed his tools and scurried out, leaving us in the deafening silence of our broken home. "Why?" My voice was a whisper, drowned out by the roar of my betrayal. Valerie sobbed, her excuses mingling with pleas for forgiveness. But each word etched deeper scars. I left the house, my mind racing with every lie and every secret glance I had overlooked in the past. The signs had been there, but I had trusted her, loved her. Now, the deceit lay bare, as broken as the sink in our bathroom. That night, I made a decision, one that would end my pain and her deceit. As I plotted my next moves, the pieces of my revenge began to fall into place. Valerie would not see it coming, just as I hadn't seen her betrayal. This was just the beginning. The morning after the revelation, I woke up early, restless and fueled by a simmering anger. I couldn't stay in the same house with Valerie, not after what I had witnessed. My first stop was at a local coffee shop, a neutral place to gather my thoughts and plan my next steps. As I sipped my black coffee, the bitterness mirroring my mood, my phone buzzed with a message from Valerie. "Can we talk?" "Please, Jason." I ignored her text, my resolve hardening. Instead, I dialed the number of a private investigator I found after a sleepless night of research. "I need information on someone," discreetly, I spoke into the phone with a calm I didn't feel. The PI, a guy named Rick, agreed to meet later that day. I spent the next few hours going through our financial statements, looking for any anomalies. The numbers told their own story, unexpected withdrawals, and payments to a company I didn't recognize. My fury grew as the pieces began to fit together. By the time I met Rick, I was ready. I handed him a photo of the plumber. "His name is Mark. Find out everything. Who he is, other clients, everything." Rick nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll get on it. You'll have what you need to know." As I left the meeting, my phone rang again. It was Valerie, desperate. "Jason, please, let's just talk about this." I answered, my voice cold. "Talk? Like you talked with him?" The silence on the other end was answer enough. "I'm sorting some things out. We'll talk when I'm ready." I spent the next few days in a motel, avoiding any place Valerie might find me. Rick was quick and thorough. Reports started coming in, emails filled with photos, and histories of Mark's engagements. It wasn't just Valerie, this was a pattern for him. Each client's story was a thread in a larger tapestry of deceit. One evening, as I mulled over the reports in the dim light of the motel room, my decision crystallized. Valerie and her plumber had made a fool of me, used our home for their escapades. It was time for retribution. The next morning, I went to a lawyer to discuss my options for divorce. I laid out the evidence, the financial discrepancies, the photos from the PI. I want a clean break, and I want her to feel the consequences, I told the lawyer. He nodded, understanding the situation. We'll file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. With this evidence, you won't have to give her anything. With legal wheels in motion, I went home to confront Valerie. She was there, waiting, a mix of fear and guilt on her face. Jason, please, I'm sorry, she began, tears in her eyes. Save it, I cut her off. I know everything. About Mark, about the money, all of it. Valerie's face crumpled, her facade breaking. I didn't mean for this to happen, she sobbed. You made your choice, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Now I'm making mine. Leaving her in the midst of her pleas, I walked out, the papers from my lawyer in hand. This was just the beginning of her downfall. As I drove away, the weight of my wedding ring felt oppressive on my finger. I pulled over, yanked it off, and tossed it into the river. The cold water swallowed it, just as the darkness had swallowed my marriage. Now, it was time for the storm. After casting my wedding ring into the river, a symbolic end to my broken marriage, I drove straight to Mark's workplace. The address from the PI's report led me to a nondescript building tucked away on the edge of town. It was early evening, and the fading light cast long shadows across the parking lot, mirroring the dark turn my life had taken. I waited in my car, watching as workers trickled out. Finally, I spotted him. Mark, the plumber, who unknowingly wrecked my home. He walked towards a beaten-up van, his day presumably over. I stepped out of my car and approached him. Mark. I called out, my voice steady and cold. He turned, confusion crossing his features, not recognizing me. Can I help you? He asked, wary now, noticing my intense gaze. We need to talk. About my wife, Valerie. His face paled at the mention of her name, and the pieces clicked into place for him. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, taking a step back towards his van. Don't bother lying. I've seen the photos. I know everything, I pushed, stepping closer, my anger barely contained. Look, man, I didn't mean to. Save it, I snapped. You're going to tell me everything, how this started, everything. Mark sighed, resigned. It was just business at first. I fix things. That's all. But it wasn't just fixing sinks, was it? I pressed, the bitterness in my voice sharp. He shook his head, looking down. No, it wasn't. We talked, right there in the dimming light of the parking lot. He confessed, the details spilling out. It wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated move by Valerie to replace the loneliness she felt. I listened, each word a hammer to my heart, but necessary for the final act of my plan. After leaving Mark, I felt a grim satisfaction knowing the full extent of the betrayal. Now, armed with everything, I was ready for the final blow against Valerie. I drove home, the plan forming with each mile passed. When I arrived, Valerie was waiting, her eyes red from crying. She tried to approach me as I walked in, but I held up a hand, stopping her. No more lies, Valerie, I said firmly. I know everything. Valerie broke down, sobbing, her body racked with guilt and regret. Jason, I'm so sorry. I was lonely, you were always working, and loneliness doesn't excuse betrayal, I cut her off. I gave you everything, and you threw it away. I told her about my meeting with Mark, about the lawyer, about the divorce. With each word, I saw the realization dawn on her face, this was the end. Jason, please, I'll do anything to make this right, she pleaded. It's too late for that, I said coldly. You should leave before the day is out. The rest of the day was a blur. Valerie packed her things, a lifetime reduced to a few boxes and suitcases. When she left, the silence of the house was a stark contrast to the storm that had raged just hours before. I sat in the quiet, the weight of my actions settling around me. That night, as I lay in bed, the emptiness of the house echoed the emptiness in my heart. But this was the path I had chosen. Revenge had been exacted, but at what cost? The intrigue of what lay ahead kept me awake. What would come next in this saga of retribution? I was soon to find out. The house felt eerily silent in the aftermath of Valerie's departure. The echoes of our shattered life seemed to haunt every corner, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had ripped everything apart. As I paced the living room, the final piece of my revenge plan crystallized in my mind. It was time to close this painful chapter of my life, but not before ensuring Valerie and Mark faced the full consequences of their actions. First, I needed to ensure that Mark's deceitful practices were brought to light. I gathered all the evidence Rick, the private investigator, had provided: photos, testimonials from other deceived clients, and detailed accounts of Mark's predatory tactics. I compiled them into a comprehensive dossier and mailed copies to the local media, the city licensing board, and several of his major clients. With the evidence laid bare, it was only a matter of time before his professional life crumbled just as he had helped crumble my personal life. Meanwhile, I turned my focus to Valerie. The divorce papers were already filed, citing infidelity with incontrovertible proof. However, financial revenge was only part of the retribution. I wanted her to feel the isolation she had thrust upon me. I started by reaching out to our shared circle of friends, slowly unraveling the narrative of her deceit. As the truth spread, her social foundation began to erode. Invitations dwindled, whispers followed her, and the facade of her perfect life started to crumble. Days turned into weeks, and the effects of my actions began to materialize. Mark's business license was suspended pending an investigation, and his reputation was in tatters. Valerie found herself ostracized, her calls to me filled with pleas for mercy, but my heart had hardened beyond forgiveness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room, there was a knock at the door. It was Valerie, looking disheveled, her eyes wide with desperation. "Jason, please, can we just talk? I have nowhere else to go." I looked at her, the woman I once loved, now a stranger warped by her own choices. "Talk? After everything? There's nothing left to say. Jason, I'm ruined. You've taken everything. I didn't realize how much I'd lose." "That was the point, Valerie," I replied, my voice void of the warmth it once held for her. "You didn't think about loss when you betrayed me." Behind her, unnoticed until now, stood Mark, equally beaten down by the repercussions of our vendetta. "Jason, I'm sorry, man. I didn't know she was your wife. I've lost my business, my reputation, everything." "Good," I said flatly, feeling a vindictive satisfaction. "Now you both know how it feels to lose everything. You deserve each other." Valerie reached out, tears streaming down her face. "Jason, please." "No," I interrupted, stepping back and closing the door slowly. "This is goodbye, Valerie. Forever." As the door clicked shut, sealing them out of my life, I turned away, a profound sense of relief washing over me. My revenge was complete, not just in their financial ruin or social ostracization but in the absolute destruction of the bond we once shared. They had each other now, and the misery that came with their choices. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my reclaimed space, I contemplated the cost of revenge. It had consumed me, driven me to acts I once would have deemed unthinkable. Yet, as I looked around at the peace that had finally settled over my home, I realized some prices were worth paying. The deception was over, the traitors had fallen, and I was free at last.